Hey, it's Dan Morales, and this is Homebuyer Radio. I am not really sure what episode number we're on. I know it's north of 100 because I lost count, which I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But we're into 2019, and one of the things I've been wanting to do is have more realtor guests as part of the podcast. Now, I don't just invite anybody to come on, right? Like, I like to have agents that I know, I trust, that kind of share the same mindset I do when it comes to clients, which is just really doing what's in our client's best interest, and we're really going to work as hard as we can to make sure we take care of them. So this week, I brought on Brandon Faber. Brandon, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and kind of what brought you into real estate. I don't think I've ever even asked you that question, man.
So you want to start from the beginning?
Yeah.
Well, it's been over 10 years now.
Okay.
So July of 2008 was when I was licensed.
So you got in like when the market was like not good at all, right?
The bottom. That's how I learned the business.
Yeah. So would you say the market, it's changed a lot in that 10 years from what it was when you started?
It's a total 360.
Yeah. It's a big difference. So 2008 is when you got in. What brought you into the industry?
It was by default.
Okay.
So I was going to Grand Valley.
Okay.
Pursuing a teaching degree.
Okay.
And my plan was to get a real estate license. Then when I wasn't teaching during the school year, then I would have something to do in the summertime.
Okay. So it was something to do in the side.
Finished up with school, and there was no teaching jobs anywhere. And I wasn't interested in moving cross country. Okay. So I jumped into real estate full time. Rest is history.
Wow. So you kind of got into it really by default, right?
I rolled the dice.
See, I didn't even know that about you, man. Like that's I'll tell you what, like I always tell people, like, people ask me, what got you into the mortgage business? And, a lot of times, it's I always tell people it's kind of like you just fall into it, right? Like you didn't I didn't think to myself, "Oh, hey, I want to be a mortgage banker when I grow up." I just kind of fell into it, and next thing you know, it's 27 plus years that I've done this. So you really weren't looking to do this as your primary career, but probably just kind of fell into it, and it grew on you, and the passion for it grew from there, huh?
Oh, I love it. It was very difficult learning the first probably 5 years from 2008 through 13. We had, a year's supply of housing, short sales, foreclosures, and working through all of that.
Yeah, and that's a very different market than like what you would have saw, let's say, last year, right?
You can even compare them.
So it's like a 180 from short sales, and you're trying to find a buyer to. I've got all kinds of buyers, but I have a shortage of inventory. When it's all said and done, and I would say like our market here in the Greater Grand Rapids market has probably been one of the most difficult markets to probably sell, for a realtor in the last, let's say, 12 months or so, because this huge shortage of inventory. What are you seeing happen there? Are you seeing that get better, or what's that look like?
I think it's leveled off a little bit, probably from the spring market through summer. Everything was multiple offers, sold within a couple, 2-3 days. Anything under probably $250,000, you couldn't even touch it.
Yeah,
a lot of it sold to cash.
Yeah,
it was very competitive.
Are you still seeing situations where there's multiple offers, or has that really cooled off a lot?
Depending on the price point and the presentability of the property, if it's something nice and turnkey, there's still a very big demand for that.
Okay.
But there's not the urgency from buyers where if I don't buy it the day it hits the market, I might be able to wait and test the waters and see what else is out there.
Okay. So you have buyers maybe being a little more willing to, I don't want to say sit on the sidelines, but kind of take a little more time in that process of thinking through what they want to buy.
They're more selective.
Okay. All right. And so for somebody who's looking to sell, so there's let's say a shift in what's happening in the market. So, you have sellers who might have some expectations that are maybe a little off for hey, I had a friend who sold their house this past summer and they sold it in 2 days
for $20,000 over asking price.
So that teaching or educating part of you is coming back, so you get to kind of help educate somebody on what the reality is of what's really going on in the market, right?
All the years I spent in school pursuing teaching has worked and paid big dividends for real estate.
I bet it has. So really, because I can see where, like this is, and I've been harping on this with, anybody who's listened to the podcast over the last probably month or so, in beyond that, has heard me really harp on working with an experienced realtor that knows what they're doing, right? Because you do this full time. You don't do something else, this isn't like a part-time gig for you, right? This is your full-time gig. So you have a good grasp of what's really going on in the market, right? And so you know how to properly set the expectation for your client. But more importantly, you know how to price the property right too, right? I think that's part of it too, because if you're somebody who's just dabbling in this market, part time, you don't really have a good gauge of what's going on with let's say the overall market, right? And you're not just specific to, let's say, somebody who's selling a house. You're working with both buyers and sellers, so you kind of see both sides of the fence as part of that. Kind of talking about, the podcast is aimed a lot towards people who are buying. What would you say is, some of the biggest mistakes you've seen for people who are, let's say, newer buyers or younger kind of first-time buyers? So what areas do you feel like you see people get tripped up the most in that process?
As far as first-time buyers?
Yeah, yep.
Knowing the whole process of what you need to do, the biggest thing, connecting obviously with a professional like yourself first and foremost,
Yep.
And knowing what your true costs are, knowing you have to have reserve accounts, you might have to budget for things in the future. Do you have a 6-month backup if your furnace goes out, your water heater? What if you have deferred maintenance you weren't aware of?
Yep.
You might qualify and have your down payment and your closing cost, but what do you have left over if you have issues in 6 months from closing? Yeah,
people overlook. That's such a good answer, because people overlook the true cost of ownership, right? Like, I have enough for my down payment, I can cover my closing costs, I got everything closed, but then they don't think about things like, hey, what happens if the furnace goes out? What happens if, I have a leak in the roof, or I have a refrigerator that dies, or something like that? Those little simple things that oftentimes they don't have a reserve or don't have money to fall back on to cover that stuff. I think of like myself when I bought my first house. I overlooked the need of a lawnmower. So I ended up like borrowing my mom's lawnmower, putting it in the back of my car, driving it over to my house. I could cut my grass, and after a couple weeks of doing that, I was like, okay, this sucks. I don't really want to do this,
It's the little incidentals. What about silverware or plates and glassware?
Stuff that
a
people,
snow shovel.
People don't think about those things, so that true cost of ownership, you should have some money to fall back on when it's all said and done. What about like when looking at properties? When people are looking at properties, is there something that you see like, the average first time buyer misses, or they oftentimes don't think about when they're looking? I'm thinking of like, as I think of people, like a lot of times they're, they don't maybe think long term. Like if I have kids, like where's the location of this as far as the school district, and is it on a busy road and stuff like that? I can see people missing that stuff. Are those things that you see people miss as part of the process? I mean, I know you do a good job of educating people, but where are the areas where you feel like you see kind of a common thread of things people miss?
I think the past couple of years, the market's been so different and so aggressive. People are buying just to own a home, and they might have been purchasing their second choice, but they realized I could buy something cheaper than what I'm renting, and it might not be my forever home, but if I hold it for 2 years, I'll make money on it.
Yeah. How many people, I think that's another good point. So like when you look at people who are buying, I feel like there's a lot of people who are like, oh, we're going to buy this house, and they think it's going to be like this long-term forever home. And I think a lot of times for people, it's just not the case, right? What would you say is kind of the average length of time that, when you think of your clients that you've had that have been first-time home buyers, what do you think is kind of like the average length of time that they tend to own a house for?
I would say for the most part, for first-time buyers, 3 to 5 years.
Okay. So at that end of, let's say, 3 to 5 years, they're usually selling in and doing something different. And I would suspect that they're probably going up in size.
Yes. I mean, a lot of my business started was people my age, early 20s, buying their first house. And then, their family grew, they outgrew it. So they're moving on to more space. Yep. And then a lot of it depends on job transfers too.
Yeah.
I had one client that bought 3 houses within 2 years because they kept getting relocated in and out of the state.
Okay. So they're constantly moving in that. Yeah, that's interesting, because I think a lot of times people will buy a house and they think they're going to stay in this house, 10, 15, 20 years, especially for people who are listening that are buying for the first time. You don't tend to do that. I think I saw an infographic that NAR did not that long ago that said like the average first-time buyer stays, I thought it was like 7 or 8 years at longest. And I know like in the lending side, I feel like that's pretty true. I would say it's probably real similar to what you're saying. It's probably more of a 5 to 7 year timeline where, people buy that first house, and that first house kind of gets them started, but it's not really the long-term play that they're looking for, because you have family grows, job changes and income grows and stuff like that, and then you started adding kids into the mix, and of course the need for space grows as part of that too. So when you look at people who are buying for the first time, and knowing that, let's say it's a maybe a 3 to 7 year hold, what pieces of advice would you give somebody who's looking to buy for the first time, knowing that that's the case? Or, what kinds of things do you think people miss as part of that?
As far as if you're going to stay for 3 to 7 years and invest money into the home,
Yeah.
kitchens and bathrooms
Because
are always the best place to put money, but you
Okay.
don't want to overprice your house for the neighborhood either and be the most expensive house in the block.
Are there cases where, because you work with sellers too, are there cases where people would go through and let's say they want to sell a property that they could potentially, let's say, put time and or money into something where they're just not going to recoup those dollars back when they go to sell?
If you do something like way over the top to your personal tastes, that might not appeal to the next person or the next buyer looking to purchase your home. But if you have something that's turnkey and move-in ready and nice, it's going to appeal to the masses.
More. So it would be fair to say, like in the case for somebody who's looking, let's say, to sell a property, it makes sense to have you come out first, maybe before they get too far into that, so that you can maybe give them some guidance as to what things make sense to, let's say, fix, repair, paint, versus just assuming that, oh, hey, I should do this, that, and the other thing, because they're trying to make everything perfect, maybe not realizing that in the process of doing that they could spend some money that they're just never going to get back.
Exactly. And then if you run the numbers too and you figure here's what you have into it, you invest another, say, 10 or 15%, will you make money? You probably will. But if you way overdo it, then it's just good money after bad.
Yeah, because you can have a case where somebody does too much to a property, or they over improve it in such a way that they're just not going to get the money back. And that's probably true, as far as additions and things for a neighborhood too. Because I get clients sometimes that will come through and say, hey, we want to do this really big addition to a property, and sometimes what happens is that really big addition is such where it's an over improvement for the neighborhood, and now you've got like this really big, really nice house that's too nice for the neighborhood it's in. Let's talk about that. When you're evaluating, and this is probably aimed a little bit more towards people who are selling, but when you're evaluating a house, for, let's say, a seller, what kinds of things are you looking at when you determine kind of what the sweet spot is for pricing a house when somebody's going to be selling one?
As far as
So, like, when you go about like evaluating comps and so on,
Mm-hmm.
like how are you coming up with a number? Let's say, let's just say I want to sell my house. What kinds of things are you looking at when you come up with an idea as to what you think the market would support for a value for the property?
So bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage,
Yep.
and then what have you put into the home since you've been there? And then what about all the other comparables as well, as far as their improvements too? How does yours compare to the one that just sold 3 to 6 months ago?
Yep, and that's where your market knowledge of what's going on with the market is important, because you kind of know where things are trending, right? So somebody who says, gosh, I sold my house in the beginning of, let's say, 2018, and you go into this really red hot market where now things are a little more normal. They're not going to see maybe an offer as fast, and the risk is in pricing the property wrong, right? Because if somebody prices a property wrong, or they price it too high, there's risk in that too, in a sense that you could kind of burn up the market. When you're out looking at buyers, how much do they look at, like how many days the market is, or how many days the property's been on the market? Are they really looking at that heavily, or no?
One thing I always tell my sellers is your first 30 days are your most critical. But the way the market's been the past 2-3 years with things selling so quickly, it's pretty much your first 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Where if you price your home at market value, you are going to get market value or more. But
Yep.
if you shoot the moon and add 20% and you're more expensive than everything that's sold, there's just too much information now where buyers can see through that.
Yeah, and so you burn up the market, and you can potentially put yourself in a situation where you end up selling for far less because of that. And I think I've seen that with some clients where we'll start high, and if somebody's willing to pay this really high price, great, we'll sell it for that. And if not, then we'll just come down in price. But that's a pretty flawed thought process, because I think it can shoot you in the foot, right?
Well, it's human nature. Everyone wants to get the most return they can. And it's just that explanation and the education where here's the statistics. If we price it at market value, you will get more most likely. But if we add too much, we're gonna have to come back down and chase it backward.
Yeah, and you can end up blowing yourself up in the process of doing that. Versus if you started right, because if you had started right from the get go, like you said, you have a better chance of maybe creating a competitive situation where you're going to attract more people through the door, which in turn should ideally end up with a better price. What about somebody who has a lot of showings on a property, but they don't necessarily see any offers? What would your advice be to somebody who's having that?
Patience, and a lot of it's the feedback too. We're getting showings, but we're not getting offers. So why is there no offers? Is it the location? Is it the size of the bedroom? Is it the location? If it's something you can't change, then you just have to kind of ride the storm out.
Yeah. So is there a point where you say, okay, I've had, because I've run into this with clients too, where they've got a house that's on the market for X number of days, and they're getting showings, but they're just not seeing offers at all. I usually like to tell people, there's a point in time too where it's the price too, right? Where you could potentially, if you're getting a lot of showings and you've had it for an extended period of time with a lot of showings, is that maybe is that a picture of the market telling you hey, you're just off in price?
It's a delicate situation, but if you can go back to a seller and say, we've had 15 showings in 30 days, but we haven't sold it yet, the writing's kind of on the wall where people like it, but not at the price we're asking. So if we're at this next step lower, we're opening up to a whole new group of buyers. Plus, it's more appealing too.
Yep. Now, is there any truth to this? I used to, having done this 27 years, I've worked with people, different agents over the years. I've had some agents that would say, okay, if your house is, let's just say, 265, and you're getting a bunch of showings and there's no offers. Hey, let's drop the price down to, $249.9. Is there a sweet spot, people, because I think people generally look up to, let's say, a certain price point. Maybe it's up to 250, it's up to 275. It makes sense to say, okay, let's just get right underneath one of those thresholds.
You've got the ceiling. So say, for instance, you're at 269. Yep. And the seller says, well, let's drop it to 265. Well, 269 and 265 are essentially the same thing. Yep. There's really no difference.
Yeah.
But if you're below 250, 249.9, you're getting everybody shopping up to 250.
Yep. So you got a bigger pool of buyers, which kind of goes back to what you were talking about. You get a bigger pool of buyers. People recognize that, hey, this property is priced really aggressive at the 249.9. You probably have a better likelihood of creating a situation where that price, maybe goes up based on the fact that you have more people recognize that this is a really good deal at this price, and it's competitive. So we've got to kind of put our best foot forward as part of what we're doing.
Well, here's something interesting too, Dan. From the 1st of January of last year through Labor Day, every listing I had sold at asking price or above.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So and that's where price matters, right? The importance of pricing a house accurately, on the money versus overpricing. Because I think what happens is sometimes, people want to, hey, this other agent told me that, I could, no problem, they would take my listing for this really inflated price. But, the challenge you run into is, well, what happens when it doesn't sell, right? You eventually end up, where you should be in price, right? And ultimately, I think, fair market value is going to be what, somebody's willing to pay for it, right? So, you can ask over market, but if you can't get a buyer, it doesn't matter, right?
Well, you've known me for a long time too, Dan, and that's one thing I just explain to all of my sellers. I'm not going to promise something that I can't do. And
absolutely.
Here's all the statistics of what we have the past, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And if someone's saying they can get you X, I'm not going to promise I can do that if I know I can't.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, even if they do offer that, it still has to appraise too.
Yeah, well, that's the other part, right?
And I have no comparables to justify a sales price. they might offer to pay that, but the bank has to still lend the money.
Yeah, yeah. So it still has to be supported with a fair market appraisal, which is another good point, right? Just because you can sell it for something doesn't mean that it'll appraise for that. And you get that where a property lender may come back and say, hey, I need 2 or 3 additional comps to support the value, where you can do that because you have the market knowledge and expertise where somebody who's just throwing a number out there may not be able to. And if you can find somebody who's willing to pay that number, which I think is getting harder, right? Maybe you would have better luck doing that this past summer, but I think it's getting harder now, as I think buyers are a little more willing to, like you said, kind of ride it out a little bit and see if it makes sense, at the price they're looking at.
What are you forecasting for this year, for 2019?
When you look at for us, volume-wise, I think we're looking at things, probably down a little bit from last year. Not necessarily in the amount of sales. I think the amount of sales, we kind of forecast that they're going to be the same, if not higher. I think the overall cost of money is probably going to, I don't want to say go up a little bit, but I think there's a lot of people that think that we'll see a little bit of an increase, but nothing substantial, right? When you look at the cost of money historically, it's still pretty cheap compared to what it's been. So I don't think it's anything that should cause anybody to wait to buy. I think there are some times where lenders like to, rates are going up, you have to hurry up and buy right now. I think rates are going to stay pretty steady. And I think if it makes sense for clients, and I think and you could probably speak to this too. It probably still makes more sense for people, or I shouldn't say makes more sense, because it always, in my mind, makes more sense to own a house than renting. But the overall, let's say, cost of ownership is probably still far better than somebody who's looking to rent, right? And there's a lot of programs that are out there that don't require huge down payments and stuff like that. And I think, the process of getting a mortgage now is still far easier than what it was probably when you started back in 2008 or so, when, after the kind of housing bubble and crisis, the number of options and programs were far more limited than what they are now. So I think, this year, we kind of expect that, the overall volume will be pretty consistent as far as purchases. I don't know that we're projecting that that's going to be off some. I think there's going to be less people probably looking to refinance their house just because the overall cost of money has gone up some.
I have yet to have one buyer client throughout the rest of last year and starting this year say they're worried to buy because money is more expensive.
Yeah, and see, because I think where people get tripped up is they focus, let's say, like on interest rate and not looking at monthly payment. And what does it cost you? At the end of the day, is it still make more sense financially to own that house than to rent one? The answer is almost always going to be yes, right? And if you look at appreciation, year over year, I think we project that you're going to continue to see appreciation. So if you're to project out, 2-3 years from now, if I don't even know what the average appreciation was here in Kent County. What would you say? I know it can vary from market to market, like submarket to submarket, but what would you say is kind of an average appreciation in Greater Kent County?
It's got to be a minimum of 10 to 12%.
Yeah, over the course of the last year.
We recently had a client that bought their first house. Alan had one brand new. All they did was paint it.
Yeah.
And from when they bought it a year ago and sold it this fall, they had a $30,000 profit.
Yeah.
being there for a year. That's after fees and expenses.
Yeah. That's a significant gain. So it's, I think we're going to continue to see appreciation. I don't know that it'll sustain it at those kind of levels, because at some point you have an issue with affordability, where it becomes difficult for people to afford a house if you have sustained, huge gains in property value. I think we saw some of that in Florida when you go back in, the early 2000s. You had a lot of people buying speculatively, where you could have somebody who had a 25% increase in their property value in 3 months.
Well, a lot of this too, I think for us, is it's legitimate supply and demand. There's so many buyers that want to get into the market, and there's so little to choose from.
Yeah.
It's naturally driving prices up.
Yeah. What do you think? Do you think that's going to get better going into this year? Do you think you're going to see supply and demand get a little bit more equal, or what do you think there?
I think sooner or later it has to level off a little bit.
Yeah.
Because it can't keep going straight up and not correct itself.
Yeah. What about for people who are looking to, is there like a segment of the market where you think it's a little softer? Is like a price point where you would say, okay, north of 300, 350 or something like that, where it's probably a little less competitive?
I would definitely say north of 300,000 it slows down.
Okay.
250 and below was very, very competitive.
Okay.
So I'm still seeing the same trend.
Yep. Now keep in mind, for those of you who are listening throughout the country, 250,000 in West Michigan, maybe 500,000 in your part of the country, or it could be 50,000, right? You have differences from one part to another. Before we started to record, you and I were talking about just subtle differences from one market to another, right? So, we're in the greater Grand Rapids, Michigan market, how you can have pretty significant difference in property value from one property to another in a relatively tight or close geographic location. Maybe talk a little bit about that, where people could miss that, right? Where that could be something that, is just overlooked.
Based on locations, everything for real estate. So you could have a very prominent, very affluent area where your average sales price is, say, $500,000+. And then you go 3 or 4 blocks south, you're not in that same school district or location, you're going to have a discrepancy in the prices.
Yeah, because it's not viewed as favorably because it could be because of the school district, but location, right? And is that something that you think, like, a lot of times buyers for the first time might overlook? Because I think a lot of times when I think of myself as the first house I owned was in a busy road, I didn't have any kids. So, those things didn't matter to me. I wasn't planning on running out, and getting hit by a car. But, there's the potential, when I started to have kids and a family, oh, hey, this location was less desirable to me. Do you think that's something that, sometimes people can overlook as part of the process of looking to buy?
I would say it's possible, but typically buyers know what they're looking for. It's just a matter of me guiding them to, what are your must-haves, what are your pros and cons, and let's, put all the pieces of the puzzle together and help you make an informed decision.
Yep. And would you say it's fair to say that, so somebody could have that, let's say, punch list of things that they want to find in a house. Is it fair to say that, there are going to be times where you're just not going to get them all?
Oh, for sure. I see that all the champagne taste on the beer pocketbook we always joke about. So you've got what are your must-haves that you need to have, and then what can you trade off and maybe get in your second house as you move up.
Yeah, yep, and that's that's such a good answer, because a lot of times people you're just not going to get everything that first time around. Highly unlikely that you're gonna check all the boxes the first time around. So it could be a case where maybe it's the second house or even the third house where you start to really get some of those other things checked off that you want to have at some point in time. And sometimes it's because financially you can't swing it. Everything you'd want to have maybe just doesn't fit into that price point that you're looking at. But it's important, because I think you go through and you determine with your clients, hey, these are the things that you're really interested in, you really need to have, and you're looking for, and then you try to work with them to check off as many of those as you're looking at properties.
For first-time buyers, Dan, I would say the biggest things are probably location.
Yep.
What's my proximity to work and amenities, grocery stores, shopping centers, and then the payment.
Yeah,
those are the two big things.
Yeah.
What's the payment, and then how close am I to my sphere of influence, my entertainment, friends, family?
Yep. And I always tell people, it's really a lot of times it's about the monthly payment, right? Like what's it going to cost me? And that's where we try to work magic on our end and get creative to say, is there a way to structure a loan where we can get the client everything they want to have within a monthly payment that they want to have? And sometimes I have conversations with clients where it's like, okay, something's got to give in the equation. You got to either give in your monthly payment, you got to give in the sales price you're looking at, or you got to give in the amount of cash that you're putting into the deal, in order to make all those things kind of balance out to where they want to be when it's all said and done.
And then how many times, Dan, do you go back and forth with a buyer, client, prospect? What's my payment on this property? What's my payment on that property? How many times do you get that?
Yeah, all the time. And it's funny because that you say that clients oftentimes don't realize that you can have differences in property taxes from one location to another, right? If I'm in the city versus, let's say, a township, certain cities within certain counties may have higher property tax rates than others, and so you can have these subtle differences in, taxes from one property to another. You can have a difference in what it costs to insure property from one to another. They may be properties that are equal in, let's say, value, but you can have all these little things that kind of add up to, all these little moving pieces, if you will, that can impact what that monthly payment looks like. So it can be interesting. And the other thing is, I think people overlook too is that, oftentimes after you buy property, the taxes can get adjusted and changed.
Or if it's on non-homestead, then you add 40% to your taxes till you get the principal residence file.
Yep. So you can run into these issues, but those are all things that you as an experienced agent will talk to people about. And me as an experienced lender will talk to people about. But I have clients that had no idea. They bought a house and they worked with somebody else and they had no idea their taxes were going to go up, or, the agent they were working with didn't explain to them that the property taxes could and likely would change after they bought the property. So, and that's, I think it goes back to just working with people who are experienced. It makes a huge difference in this process, because then you don't run into, little things overlooked, and that matters a lot, and for you as an agent, having done, this, north of 10 years, that's pretty rare, because, in your guys' industry, you've seen a lot of people come in over the course of probably the last couple of years that are either, dabbling in it part-time, or it's just not something that they're looking at full time. I mean, you kind of thought about that getting into it originally. It was gonna be something on the side or part time. And it really became a full time gig for you. Where your clients get the benefit of that full time commitment, that full time knowledge and expertise of what's going on in the marketplace.
And to really provide top-notch service, you really have to be in it full time, because then you have a very good pulse on the market and what's happening.
Yeah, especially now, right? Because the market today is different than what it was if you go back, in the summer. The summer, for a seller is a much more vibrant, let's say, market. Where now it's maybe a little closer to normal than what it was, let's say, this past summer of 2018. So I think that's very true. So tell me, how does somebody get in contact with you?
Email brandon@wearejhr.com or our website, wearejhr.com.
And how about phone number for you?
616-644-1199.
Okay. And I'm Dan Morales with North Point Bank. My NMLS number is 709-729. You can find me online at danmorales.com. That's DANMORALEZ.com. North Point Bank is an equal housing lender. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week. Have a good one.